Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Now today we are talking about very touchy-feely topic, but don't worry, this is not a review. As I promised some time ago, I will not start reviewing cables. But what I already tried to do on this channel with interconnect cables, if you didn't watch that video, you can watch it now before this one if you want to, or after this one. That one just aimed to prove that there are hearable differences when you change your cables. Nothing else, because nothing else can be proved over a YouTube video. You can either trust me on my word, or I can record something and show you that there is a difference. Now, what kind of a difference? You cannot actually hear that through a YouTube video. You can never do that. Because to hear a system, you have to hear it in person. Because when I record something, we already have that added color of a recording itself. Then of a YouTube compression. Then of your own system. With your own cables. It's just insane. But some tonal differences, if they're big enough, survive even all of that. And as I said, I already did similar thing with an interconnect cable. But today I'm going to talk about something even worse. I'm going to talk about power cables and digital cables. And as we all know, these shouldn't make any difference. Because, power is just a power. And digital is digital. Zeros, ones. You cannot improve zeros and ones. But I ask you now, do you? Do you really know that? Because I think I did. Like 2 years ago, all of my cables were just technically functioning and correct cables, like this pile on the right here. So what I have here is a default factory cable that you would get with your amp or a DAC or anything that you buy. It's functional, it's of a sufficient thickness, it can carry that power without ever getting warm or anything like that. It's just a good old power cord. Then, for example, to connect my streamer, digital streamer to my DAC, I would use this, I don't know, like $3 or $5 SPDIF digital cable. Why? Because digital is only digital, right? Zeros and ones. And that's it. It works. I connected my streamer to my DAC. I have a signal. So it works. Everything else that matters actually happens in the DAC. At least so I thought. And lastly, of course, to connect my streamer to my home network, I used a provided Ethernet cable. This one came with the device that my network provider installed in my house. It must be good. For Christ's sake, I watch Netflix in 4K in HDR. This same connection. It has more than sufficient bandwidth for simple audio signal. So this was what I used like 2 years ago when I started this channel and I tested some of the DACs and so on. But nowadays I have a little more experience and a little bit different cables. So for example, power cables in my system look like this. And my digital SPDIF cable is again this. It's not the ordinary cable. This one is made completely out of single crystal copper and even has this unique, basically handmade connectors that are again single crystal copper. And even my Ethernet cable, what? Like, are you crazy? Is not your ordinary cable, as you can see. It's thick, As you can see, it looks like a little snake. It's thick, it's beautiful. But why? Why, you ask? Why did you buy into all that propaganda? It is known cables do not make a difference. Especially power cables and digital cables, you fool. Well, I used to think the same. Maybe the thing that you don't know about me is that I'm an electrical engineer. I worked for years calibrating and measuring lab equipment, and I do tend to believe in facts and science and things that I can prove. And because of that, For like first 10 or 15 years of my hi-fi journey, I used these kind of cables because I believed they're sufficiently good. And even when I tried to prove that cables make or don't make difference, I would buy like the cheapest hi-fi cable available. For example, something costs 40 or 50 US dollars. But I'm cheap. I'm really cheap. So I don't even pay 50 US dollars. I find that same model secondhand. And I pay for it 25 US bucks or euros in my country. And most of the times I did conclude that these don't make much of a difference. But to be really honest, these cheap hi-fi cables most of the times don't make big difference. And to be even more honest, some of them, like I tried Oilbach, I think it's pronounced that way, cheapest power cable. It looks very similar to this one, it's just black cable, but they say it's pure copper inside and these connectors are gilded. That one actually sounded worse, really decreased, lowered the sound fidelity of my amp at that time. It used to cost just 30 US dollars, but fortunately or unfortunately for my budget, I have some friends that are crazy audiophiles. And then they insisted, like, please let me loan you this cable. I just want you to hear this cable or that cable. And I was hesitant to do that. I didn't want to be perfectly honest. I thought it's a waste of my time. And especially when they tell me prices of some of these cables. They're several hundreds of US dollars, some of them even thousands. That's insane. And of course, I'm not going to buy such expensive cables for my mid-range system. But some of them were persistent, and I was like, okay, it cannot hurt me, just a slight annoyance. I will borrow them, and I'll try them out. There were all kind of brands involved, like with power cables. I don't know if I pronounced all of these right, so I'll just put them on the screen. Oide, Shunyata, Viborg, that's like affordable one even. Isotech, and then with digital cables, Wireworld, and some other brands. Oh, from a neighboring country, Croatia, Marohei cables. I tried all of their cables actually. Power cables, interconnects, speaker ones, digital ones, and they're all great, but they're insanely expensive, at least for my own budget and my own system. And I just tried them, I had to return them. But that's the problem. When you have something on a longer loan and you listen to a really good stuff for like 3 weeks, returning to something that you considered to be okay before, it's a deflating experience, really. But I didn't want to spend that amount of money, and by chance I actually stumbled upon this local manufacturer that's hand-making all of his products and cables, and it's insane, he's even producing his own single crystal copper. The guy is called Andre and his brand is called VBS. And all of these cables that you see on the left here are made of that single crystal copper and they're called VBS. But before anything else, as promised, I'll play a sound demo. Now I know, these are royalty-free songs, they're okay, but they're not some hits that you all know and love. I do this because if I play huge, successful hits that are not royalty-free, all of the earnings from my video will be claimed by these greedy music companies. And in many countries in the world, my video will actually be blocked. So because of that, I use these royalty-free songs that I find nice. They're nice songs, but they're not famous and big hits. Anyways, what I did in this sound demo, first I tried recording just changing one cable at a time, but it's not enough. The difference is really small. You can barely notice it after me recording it and then compressing it, uploading it to YouTube, and then you playing it through your own system with its own shortcomings, its own color, and its own cables. It's, you know. So what I did here, In one set, I will not tell you which one it is until the end of the demo. You are listening to all of my devices. That means Hegel Integrated Amp, Denafrips Ares II DAC, and digital streamer powered by Allo Shanti linear power supply. All of these are connected with these type of power cords. 3 power cords that came with those devices. But also on a digital side of things, I'm using this, again, free Ethernet cable to connect my router to my digital streamer, and then I use this really cheap from AliExpress digital SPDIF coaxial cable to connect that streamer to the DAC. So all of these plain cables are on the one side of this comparison. On the other side, I use 3 power cables like this one for my amp, DAC, and the linear power supply that powers digital streamer. But also I use this Ethernet cable and I use this SPDIF digital cable. They're all made of single crystal copper made by VBS here in Serbia. And I'll just play that demo right now to you, and you try to listen for the differences. You try to notice, do you hear any differences? They will be significantly lower than in real life, than what you would hear if you were here with me in the room. But one important thing to say is that both recordings were made with the exact same settings, with my Tascam DR100 MK3 recorder that I newly purchased. It's really good, from the same position with the same volume level. So nothing really changes except the cables. Power cables and digital cables. Speaker ones and interconnect ones are the same. So let's hear that demo and see if you can notice any difference.
With 65 degrees, the last time I asked, I was down on my knees. The last time I heard you speak, you shot ice into my veins. I almost wished I would rain. Now your forecast calls for me. Does the sun go down on the road between us? And the world keeps right on spinning, day by day. Sarah, don't you cry no more. Sarah, don't you cry no more. Your daddy's gone and he won't come home. He's off fighting another man's war. Sarah, don't you speak no more. Sarah, don't you speak no more. Your words have all come off far too tall. Your words are all made by man. Footsteps are all weightless stone.
So, we are back. Did you hear any difference? Any difference at all? It doesn't matter which one you preferred, because that can be like completely skewed by this recording. I just want to know your thoughts. Did you hear any difference between the set A and set B? Please write down below the video in the comments. But now I'm going to reveal that set A, those were, in my opinion, the good cables, VBS ones. While set B was with these free or just cheap cables. And if I'm lucky, you should hear that with these cables, set A, everything sounded more precise and more controlled, cleaner and crisper. At least that's what I'm hearing in the room. With these default cables, mid-bass becomes muddier. That's like first thing that you notice. Mid-bass and mid-range becomes more cluttered, muddier. Soundstage is shallower, more flat, more congested between the speakers, and also energy, leading edges of the notes, like drums, cymbals, string plucks. Everything sounds so much more energetic and crisp with these better cables than with the default ones, where it just sounds muffled, less resolving, more blended with each other. Just separation and layering is not as good. You definitely cannot hear all of that I'm explaining, but in real life the difference when you change this much cables is quite noticeable. And the idea for this video actually got from a friend that was like complete cable skeptic. And he enjoyed my system. And he said, man, I didn't think that this Hegel and that those KEFs can sound as good and as spacious and as natural as I'm hearing them sound here. And he was thinking like, that's probably due to your DAC, Denafrips Ares II. It makes everything sound so good and 3D and natural. Well, it is, it's a great DAC. And I told him part of that, at least a part of that is because of my cabling. He just shrugged like, cabling. And I did this same experiment in person for him. Changed these 3 power cables and digital cables, and he was shocked. He was seriously looking like this. But why is everybody saying that these do not make a difference? It's probably just because they never tried a really good cable. Because there's a lot of snake oil out there. There's a lot of brands that pay more attention to advertising and to things looking mighty and great than to actual sound fidelity. And that's what putting this whole cable thing into a really bad position, in my opinion. And I would also never get into this if I didn't have these friends and acquaintances that loaned me some really great cables that I already mentioned in the video. And when I had to return these, my system didn't sound as good anymore. And luckily for me, by chance, I stumbled upon this guy from Serbia, that's my own country, called Andrei, that's producing these VBS cables. And I wanted to buy something from him, like I wanted to purchase connectors, these power connectors only. He makes these pins, they're from single crystal copper, and then he puts them in this type of case that looks like oide, but it's not really. And I wanted to buy these. I was cheap, but he asked me like, what are you going to put those connectors on? And I told him like, oh, I have a really good dual-wound cables. Those are made of tinned copper. And I really think those are pretty decent wires. But he told me like, no, you cannot do that. Well, you can, but you will not hear what these can really do. You have to use high quality single crystal copper wire. Basically, the whole cable has to be of a really high quality for you to notice and appreciate what it can do for your system. I still didn't want to purchase the whole cable, but thankfully he actually gifted one to me. I just paid for connectors, but he gifted the whole cable to me. And I tried it in my own system and I realized, like, wow, this really sounds really good. At that moment, it sounded better than anything I've heard up until that point in my own system. And I did hear some really good cables that were on a loan. I had some of them to directly compare them to this one. As I mentioned, some Shunyata cables, OIDE cables, Isotech cables, and this one was better and far cheaper than those. And I was like, I guess I'm doing this. I ordered several more cables. Then after some time, I started exploring more. I tried his interconnects and digital SPDIF cable and eventually Ethernet one. And I was really happy with what I'm getting. It got me that energy and sound and clarity of really expensive brand cables that I just couldn't afford. And I just seized that opportunity. He's a guy that just recently started doing this. And he's making some really incredible sounding products. There are some concerns. Some friends asked me, like, but this is bare copper. Man, it's going to oxidize. But, like, the first cable that I got from him was a year and a half ago. He claimed to me that the way he is making this, they will not actually oxidize. And I was skeptic about that. He told me, like, it might develop a really mild case of natural copper patina in a slightly darker copper color, but it will never become green and oxidize like normal copper does. Now, I'm not an expert on this. I don't have idea if that's true or not, but what I can tell you is that my first cables and connectors from a year and a half ago are still looking really good, and I really don't see any signs of deterioration here. But I definitely really liked what I heard, and I ordered all of these cables not only as an investment for my current system, but as an investment for all of my future systems. Because speakers will be upgraded eventually at some point, the amp, the DAC too, but now I'm really happy that I have these truly high quality cables that can measure to these worldwide brands at a much lower cost. And just as a proof that I'm not the only delusional one here, I actually know few guys that have much greater, much better systems than my own. For example, pricey Macintosh gear and so on. I'm talking about tens of thousands of dollars systems, and some of those guys tried these same cables and they bought them. And unlike me, they didn't even use these plain ones. They used some branded good ones, and they liked these more. So yeah, I used that opportunity. I bought almost all of the cables in my system are VBS now, because when I heard how they sound and I compared them to a commercial offerings, I realized this is a really good chance for me to get something sounding extremely good for a very reasonable price. And if you want to check his other cables and systems that are using them, pictures and so on, I'll put his Facebook profile in the description down below the video. There is still no website or anything. As I said, it's a small one-man thing currently. It's a small Serbian manufacturer. And also I have to mention this. I'm not in any way affiliated with VBS. I don't get anything from telling you that these cables are really good. I purchased these myself like anybody else, and I will continue to purchase some more because I really like their quality. But the reason to make this video was actually to show you that sound demo. To try to show you that even these cables that a lot of skeptics are saying that cannot make a difference, like power cables and digital cables, they actually do. And you can hear the same exact system sounding a little bit muffled or a little bit shrill. But then, if you take a really decent set of cables and you put them everywhere, starting with interconnects and speaker cables, but then power cables, digital cables, you'll definitely hear a significant improvement in sound fidelity. And that's something that I really believe that at some point, if your system is good enough, resolving enough, if every part of the system is sufficiently good, at some point, at some moment, if for example each of these components is $1,000 or more, at that moment, if you really want to get the best possible sound fidelity, you have to pay attention on cables. Okay, you don't have to, but by not doing that, you'll severely limit your gear. And especially if you start buying higher end gear, but keep them with really cheap cables, it's like just wasting money. It's bad investment in my opinion. So I don't think this is an entry-level story. If you just started in this hobby, just buy nice, decent cables, connect everything and enjoy. And if you can upgrade your DAC from, I don't know, topping E30 to topping E50 for $100, you do that. You buy better gear. But at one point, when the gear is good enough and revealing enough, and upgrading it means that you have to spend substantial amount of money, then investing in cables is a really, really good idea, because there's a huge chance that at that moment your gear is limited by your cheap cables. It's just something to think about. It's a food for thoughts, and I hope that this video and this sound demo will start you thinking about that if you're in a position to try some decent hi-fi cables. If not, that's okay too. You might get there, or you maybe don't want to. That's again perfectly fine. We all have our level of insanity in this hobby, but I hope you enjoyed this anyway. And if you did, then click that button, subscribe, consider becoming a patron even, and see you next time. Bye. Hey, you, wanna check my cables? Look. Wow.